Imagine standing in the magnificent St. George's Hall at Windsor Castle during one of the most prestigious white-tie state banquets of the decade. The room is filled with over 150 foreign ambassadors, global dignitaries, and senior members of the royal hierarchy. Gold cutlery glistens beneath giant chandeliers. Seating arrangements are calculated down to the millimeter by top-tier diplomats, and the entire atmosphere operates on an invisible, unbroken code of absolute silence and perfection. In an environment like this, nobody leaves their designated chair, nobody speaks out of turn, and every single move is dictated by centuries of strict royal etiquette. Yet, on the night of May 8th, that seamless illusion of perfection shattered in a matter of minutes. 15-year-old Freddy Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla's grandson and a former coronation page of honor, was seated among elite global guests due to his privileged connection to the Queen Consort. But instead of showing the flawless behavior expected from someone granted access to the highest level of state diplomacy, his actions spiraled rapidly out of control. It began with discreetly sneaking sips of alcohol, escalating into loud and unruly behavior, and eventually turning into deeply inappropriate remarks directed at nearby female guests and serving staff. Diplomats were forced to awkwardly avert their eyes as the Queen's grandson created an embarrassing spectacle. However, the ultimate breaking point was not just the unacceptable noise or disrespectful comments. The true emergency unfolded when the teenager reached into his pocket, pulled out his mobile phone, and began secretly recording inside the heavily guarded private banquet hall. Taking unauthorized video footage in a room occupied by heads of state and top government officials goes far beyond a lack of manners. It represents a catastrophic breach of diplomatic boundaries and an immediate high-level security threat. While other royals politely looked away and staff hesitated to intervene out of fear of upsetting the Queen Consort, Catherine, Princess of Wales, recognized instantly that a dangerous red line had been crossed. Without waiting for security or domestic staff to act, Catherine pushed back her chair, stood up in front of the entire room, and walked deliberately across the hall. The room instantly fell into a stunned silence as international dignitaries watched the future Queen break minor banquet etiquette to preserve the core integrity of the monarchy. Approaching the table with absolute, unwavering composure, Catherine gave a direct, quiet command to the teenager, instructing him to leave the hall immediately through the nearest side entrance without making another sound. Within seconds, palace security flanked the boy and escorted him out of sight. Across the room, sitting at the highest table of honor, Queen Camilla was forced to watch her grandson physically removed in front of the world's most powerful political figures, completely powerless to stop it. 5 days later, Kensington Palace issued an unprecedented formal memo establishing a zero-tolerance policy for extended family members without official titles attending state functions. This swift action sent shockwaves through the monarchy, proving that the era of protecting personal entitlement at the expense of the institution's reputation was officially over. To truly understand how a 15-year-old teenager felt entitled enough to pull out a mobile phone and record inside a high-security state banquet, you have to look far beyond a single chaotic night at Windsor Castle. This was not an isolated incident of youthful carelessness, nor was it a sudden, unexpected overreaction by the Princess of Wales. What unfolded at St. George's Hall was the inevitable breaking point of a dangerous pattern of unearned privilege and avoided consequences that has been quietly operating within the royal orbit for over 25 years. To trace the root of this deep-seated entitlement, one must go back to the late 1990s, specifically to a massive public crisis during the 1999 Cannes Film Festival. At the time, Tom Parker Bowles, Freddy's father, was caught in an undercover sting operation by journalists offering to supply illicit substances. Covered extensively by major news outlets like the BBC and The Guardian, the scandal threatened to completely derail Camilla's delicate, carefully orchestrated introduction to the British public as Prince Charles's long-term partner. However, instead of allowing the young man to face public accountability or legal repercussions, the royal PR machinery immediately swung into action. A powerful, unwritten playbook was deployed, absolute institutional silence, quiet diplomatic maneuvering, and sweeping the controversy deep beneath the royal carpet. Tom Parker Bowles faced no meaningful legal penalties, nor was he exiled from the privileged circles of high society. The family closed ranks, protecting its own at all costs, and the public was expected to simply forget the entire affair. When a family experiences that level of institutional immunity, it creates a toxic precedent. It sends a clear message to the next generation that the standard rules of society, and even the strict protocols governing working royals, do not apply to them. For more than 2 decades, the Parker Bowles family lived behind an invisible shield of royal patronage, cultivating an environment where a young teenager grows up observing that no matter what boundaries are crossed, his grandmother's formidable influence will always be there to erase the mess. In fact, the palace system tried to protect Freddie long before the infamous Windsor banquet. In late 2025, during a private royal gathering at the Sandringham estate, internal household staff and security details flagged the teenager's increasingly disruptive behavior. Queen Camilla was directly informed of these serious warning signs by palace staff. Yet, true to the family playbook, she chose discretion over discipline. The Sandringham incident was quietly hushed up to avoid internal family friction, effectively granting the teenager a free pass. By choosing to hide those early red flags, Camilla inadvertently set the stage for a massive, unavoidable public spectacle. But on the night of May 8th, Camilla miscalculated one critical reality. The person holding institutional authority inside St. George's Hall was no longer King Charles, but Catherine. After the quiet removal of the teenager from the banquet, the real clash of monarchical eras took place behind closed doors, away from international ambassadors and press cameras. Once inside the private drawing rooms of Windsor Castle, a visibly shaken and furious Queen Camilla directly confronted her daughter-in-law. Camilla bitterly argued that Catherine's sudden public intervention had unnecessarily humiliated her grandson and cast a dark shadow over her entire family, insisting that domestic staff should have handled the matter quietly without creating a scene. But Catherine did not raise her voice, nor did she offer a single word of apology. Looking directly at her mother-in-law, the Princess of Wales delivered an icy, devastating response, stating that if Camilla had chosen to deal with the problem when it first surfaced at Sandringham, they would not be standing in that room having this conversation at all. In that single composed sentence, Catherine laid bare the uncomfortable truth. Camilla's decision to shield her grandson from minor discipline months earlier had forced Catherine to enforce drastic consequences in front of global dignitaries. Before the argument could escalate further, Prince William stepped into the room with the definitive authority of a future king. Firmly shutting down his stepmother's defense, William made it unmistakably clear that he stood completely behind his wife's actions, declaring that the safety of state guests and the integrity of the crown would always take priority over personal pride. There's a profound, almost poetic layer of symbolism embedded deep within that tense night at Windsor Castle that reveals everything about the direction of the British monarchy. As Catherine stood her ground against a centuries-old culture covering up family mistakes to save face, she was wearing a magnificent diamond bracelet that once belonged to Princess Diana. The historical resonance of that moment is impossible to overlook. Diana's tragic experience within the royal institution was largely defined and ultimately damaged by a rigid system that prioritized covering up uncomfortable truths behind palace walls over individual accountability and basic honesty. Now, decades later, her son's wife stood in those exact same historic halls, refusing to abide by those outdated rules. Catherine was effectively using absolute transparency and uncompromising discipline to dismantle the very culture of protective silence that had once deeply harmed Diana. It was a subtle yet unmistakable statement to the world that the old royal playbook had officially been burned and rewritten. This fundamental shift culminated on the morning of May 13th, when Kensington Palace released a leaked memorandum establishing strict behavioral conditions for all extended family members attending state functions. That document is far more than a simple disciplinary action against a rebellious teenager. It represents a formal, public declaration of a transfer of power within the crown. For decades, the extended royal family existed in a comfortable, highly privileged gray area. Relatives in this inner circle enjoyed immense social prestige, automatic invitations to grand state occasions, and the elevated lifestyle of being adjacent to royalty, yet they rarely carried the burden of public duty or institutional accountability. Today's strict protocol erases that gray area forever. The uncompromising message from Prince William and Catherine is clear. Access to the royal orbit is no longer an automatic birthright, but strictly conditional privilege. If extended family members wish to stand in the magnificent halls of Windsor and enjoy the benefits of royal association, they will adhere to its highest diplomatic standards without exception. On paper, Queen Camilla still holds the highest female rank in the land, representing traditional, formal power. However, what the world witnessed at Windsor Castle was the undeniable strength of Catherine's soft power, a power built on overwhelming public trust, flawless dedication to duty, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the institution. By taking decisive action during a high-stakes diplomatic dinner and backing it up with formal palace policy, Catherine proved that true authority does not merely come from wearing a crown, but from the courage to enforce what is right, even when it creates deep personal tension within the family. This moment marks the active construction of the future monarchy under William and Catherine, who are shaping a leaner, more transparent, and modern institution that leaves zero room for toxic entitlement or personal immunity.